Hello guys, it's Bella and welcome back to another series of Mystery Monday. So if you guys didn't see my previous video, this is a series where we talk about unsolved mysteries, unsolved murders and unsolved missing people cases. So today's video is going to be on the disappearance of the Beaumont children, and this is a really old case. I think it's something like 51 years old. It is a really interesting case. And it still hasn't been solved. It's one of Australia's biggest missing people cases, one of the most publicized missing people cases, and it actually changed the way that a lot of Australian people supervise their children, basically, because things were a lot different back then. This happened in 1966 on Australia Day, which was the 26th of January. So the Beaumont family consists of 3 children who were the children of Jim and Nancy Beaumont. The children are Jane, she was the eldest at 9 years old, Anna, she was 7 years old at the time of her disappearance, and the youngest was Grant, he was 4 years old. The 3 children disappeared from Glenelg Beach in South Australia, Adelaide, on the 26th of January 1966, so 51 years ago. It was a different time back then. It was a very long time ago, but it is still a very interesting case. And it's basically like one of the biggest police investigations in Australian history still to this day. The Beaumont family lived on Harding Street in Somerton Park in Adelaide, and they were a 5-minute bus ride away from Glenelg Beach, which is where the children decided to go on Australia Day. So they wanted to catch a 10 a.m. bus, which was literally 5 minutes away from Glenelg Beach, and they had done this exact trip the day before on the 25th of January, so obviously their parents thought it would be fine. And I just want to stress that parenting was a lot different back then. Things were a lot safer back then, and it was considered normal, I guess, to let your children go, even though they were 9, 7 and 4. But Jane, the eldest child, was considered responsible enough to look after all 3 of them and get them home, get them to the beach and get them home, basically. So Nancy was at home that day, she was seeing a friend, and Jim, their father, had gone to work. They caught a 10 a.m. bus down to Glenelg Beach. It was a 5-minute bus ride, and they were meant to return home by 2 p.m. on the 2 p.m. bus back home for lunch. So they didn't arrive back on the 2 p.m. bus, and Nancy just assumed that they had missed the bus, so she wasn't too worried. But then when the second bus came and the children weren't on it, she started to get worried, obviously, as any parent would. They were very responsible children. They had completed the trip the day before, come home on time, so obviously Nancy was worried. She ended up calling her husband Jim, and he decided to go and have a look down at the beach for the children, with no luck, actually. So he came back, got Nancy, and they went and looked down at the beach together for the children, and they had no luck. They didn't find them. So Jim looked all night for the children, and by 7:30 p.m. they decided to call the police, and then by the next day, on the 27th of January, the Beaumont children were officially declared missing. So Jim just looked all night. He said that he wasn't going to sleep until he found them and they were home safe. And Nancy was so distraught about this that she actually had to be sedated. It took them many days to even be able to talk to the press about what had happened, because they were so heartbroken because their children had disappeared. They have no idea what happened to them, and honestly, I don't blame the parents. I know they let the children go by themselves to the beach, but I don't blame them, because that's how Australian society was back then. It was completely different. It was considered safe to do that. So many children, so many parents let their children do that. So let's get into some of the evidence. The first piece of evidence, which is a really big piece of evidence in this case, is that the children bought meat pies and pasties from a shopkeeper who knew them well from previous visits. They had bought meat pies from this shopkeeper before, so they knew who they were. And they came in and they bought meat pies and pasties with a €1 note, and Nancy had only given them enough money for the bus fare there and back and for food, and she didn't give them a €1 note. So this led police to believe that someone had actually given them the note, because how else would they have gotten this €1 note if they didn't get it from their parents. Another piece of evidence is that people actually spotted them with a tall, lean, blonde man. So several witnesses actually corroborated this. At first, the man was kind of like lying down watching them play, and then like several minutes later he was up and he was like playing with the children. This tall, lean, blonde man was also seen helping the children get dressed, and then they waited outside the bathroom for him while he was getting dressed. So Jane and the rest of the children were actually very shy, but especially Jane, she was super shy. So this kind of led police to believe that maybe he had kind of tried to gain their trust over a few different visits, because otherwise, like, it's kind of strange for these really shy children to just start playing with this random man who they have no idea who he is, and like taking their money and walking around with him and playing with him. So police do think that he may have gained their trust over a few different visits, or that maybe he was a child predator, because they are very convincing and really know how to kind of like talk to children and gain the trust of children. But another thing that's strange about this is on previous visits, Anna had said to their mum that Jane had a boyfriend at the beach, which Nancy took no notice of at the time that Anna had said it, because she was kind of just like, oh, you know, maybe she just made a friend at the beach. But later on, when they went missing, that's when Nancy decided that maybe that was the tall blonde man that was seen with them that Anna called her boyfriend. So that's another reason to believe that maybe he had been trying to gain their trust over a few different visits to the beach. Sometime after they had been spotted playing, at about 12:15 p.m, the man and the children were seen walking away from the beach together. The last confirmed sighting of the Beaumont children was at 3 p.m. They were seen to be walking along Jetty Road, which is in the general direction of their house. They were seen to be laughing and smiling and holding hands, so they seemed pretty unbothered. And this was seen, well, this was the witness of this was a postman. He was considered reliable, but it was kind of strange that they were kind of like seemed so unbothered and just like laughing, holding hands, walking towards their house when it was so far past their curfew. They were also seen without the tall blonde man, so the police believe that he is a reliable source, but they also think that he might have been mixed up about the time and he actually saw them before noon. But this is the last confirmed sighting of them. If he was correct, if he did see them at 3 p.m, but if not, then the last confirmed sighting was from the other witnesses at the beach that saw them at like 12:15 p.m. with the man walking away from the beach. Several months after the disappearance, a woman came forward and said that she saw 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, and a man entering an empty house. She later saw a young boy walking along the road, where an older man caught up to him and caught him pretty roughly and took him back into the house, and that was the last she saw of them. And then the next morning, the house seemed to be deserted again, but police think it was pretty weird that she didn't come forward about this sooner. Like, she decided to mention it a few months after the disappearance, and everyone knew about it because it was really, really big news. And I don't know, it was just weird that she didn't come forward sooner. But basically, there was sightings of the children which were reported for a year after the case had happened. Well, there are still people coming in reporting things about this case, and news outlets are still coming out about this case and presenting new information, new suspects. But the case did not only attract attention in Australia, it attracted international attention, and they decided to fly in a psychic. So on the 8th of November in 1966, they decided to fly in Gerard Croisset, I believe that's how you pronounce his last name. He is a parapsychologist and a psychic. This guy had apparently helped solve other cases, and so they flew him in because he was really well known and they thought that he could help, but he ended up being no help at all. And I think it was really sad actually what the parents had to go through with this guy. Basically, he changed his story from day to day. His story was constantly changing. He did identify a warehouse that he believed the children were buried in, and actually when he said that he thought something bad had happened to the children, Nancy and Jim were both adamant. They were like, I think that you're wrong, I don't think that they're dead. Like, they both had high hopes that their children were still alive. So this guy thought that they were in a warehouse, that's where their bodies had been buried. They ended up going there and excavating it, only to find nothing. So at the time of their disappearance, this warehouse was a building site, but when Gerard came and said that he thought that they had been buried there, it had newly laid concrete. The property owners were a bit reluctant to actually excavate the place and search for the children because obviously they just had new laid concrete, but the public raised about $40,000 or something huge like that. So they ended up excavating it and finding nothing. They did not find the children's bodies there. There were no remains, nothing found, and the police said it was believed that they were carrying about 17 items between the three of them, including towels and clothes and shoes, but none of the items were ever found. So in 1996, the place where Gerard said that the children's bodies were buried was undergoing a partial demolition, so the owners decided to let them have another look for the bodies, and once again there was nothing there. So around 2 years after the disappearance of the children, the parents Jim and Nancy received a few false letters which were supposedly written by Jane and the person who was holding them captive. I think they received 3 or 4 letters. For some reason there are a lot of people saying 3 letters and there's a lot of people saying 4 letters. So the first letter, the author said that he would return the children at a designated place, and a designated time and place. He said for Jim and Nancy to meet him there, so they did. They also brought an undercover detective and they were met by nobody. They then received a second letter which said that he was not going to return them because there was an undercover detective with them. So he then said that he was going to keep the children forever, but later, like 25 years later, they did fingerprints on these letters and found out that they were a hoax. They were written by a teenager at the time who was like 41 when they found out who he was, so they ended up deciding not to arrest him for the letters. So there was a few suspects for this case really, but none of them have ever been convicted, and it's still unknown. Nobody has really any viable leads to who has done this, but one of the suspects is currently in his 70s. His name was Bevan Spencer von Einem. I think I'm saying that right. I don't think I'm saying that right actually. Von Einem was an accountant. He was arrested and convicted of the abduction, murder and torture of Richard Kelvin. Richard Kelvin was the teenage son of a TV news presenter. His name was Rob Kelvin. At the time of the Beaumont Children's disappearance, he was 21 years old, which is why some people think that he was too young to have committed the crime, especially because the person that was described by a lot of witnesses was around 30 years old. But then again, some people think that witnesses are unreliable, especially when they didn't know what they were looking for. Like, they didn't really understand that anything was out of the ordinary, and they also think that police can sometimes understand what witnesses are saying wrong. So then again, it is possible that maybe they were confused and that he was around 21 years old and it was Von Einem. There was another suspect. His name was Derek Edward Percy, and he was so horrible that his parents, his mum, didn't want to leave him alone with other children. This man died in 2013, but he was a prime suspect for the Wanda murders, which I should have mentioned earlier. They happened a year before the Beaumont children died, and 2 girls were murdered in Sydney, which was another massive case just before the disappearance of the Beaumont children. I feel like both of them together kind of changed the way Australian society worked in regards to child safety. So at Wanda Beach, a teenager was described who was about 17 years old and looked like Percy, and he was found, well, described seen near the two girls at the beach before they were murdered. And at the time of the murders, he also lived within 2 kilometers of the Wanda Beach. So he was not only the main suspect for the murder of the 2 girls at Wanda Beach, he was also the main suspect for 2 other murders, one in 1966. This was of Alan Redston in Canberra. Most of the murders that he committed were near water, and he was in the general vicinity of the murders at the time that they took place. Him and his dad owned a small yacht, and they often did regattas, one of them which came to Glenelg Beach on Australia Day, and he was only 18 years old at the time, but considering he was a main suspect for the murder of the 2 girls in Wanda Beach only a year before, it's not unlikely that he was able to commit this crime. But the bodies of the Beaumont children were never found, which kind of insinuates that it was very carefully planned, these murders, if they were murdered, or that they weren't even murdered. So it doesn't seem like an impulsive crime of some, you know, 18-year-old boy. Not to mention his other murders, all of the people that were murdered were found. So last year, nearing the 50th anniversary of the disappearance of the Beaumont children, the police were looking into another lead. It was from a credible source, and the person who called up was adamant that this guy was the killer. Unfortunately, though, the person accused was already deceased, and it's kind of hard to look into them and accuse them and, you know, basically investigate when the person is deceased. So I have no idea what came of that. I don't know if they found anything. They might still be investigating. I don't know what happened to the end of that lead. I don't even know who the lead was. They did also have another lead recently where they were investigating a millionaire bar owner named Tony Munro, who was also a sex offender. So they were also investigating him, but nothing has come of it. They still have no viable leads. They have no idea who did this. They don't even know what type of crime it is. It could have been a sex trafficking crime. It could have been a sex crime. It could have been an abduction. It could have been a murder. They have absolutely no idea. They don't even know if the children are still alive or not. And unfortunately, a lot of the suspects for this case would be very, very old by now. Even the children would be pretty old by now. But let me know what your thoughts are, what you guys think. It's a super sad case. It's so heartbreaking, and I am so heartbroken for the parents. But I really hope you guys found this video interesting, and if you do want to see more, please make sure to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and hopefully I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!